So I am dyslexic and dyspraxic. It's something that I'm actually still familiarizing myself with, because originally when I got a diagnosis, it was very much in terms about reading and processing, going through education. And I'm realizing there's a lot more to it, because it counts as being neurodivergent, and it covers my neural pathways. There's a way of, I'll think differently to, let's say, the typical way of thinking and problem solving, and how we lead into like more the creativity side as well. So there's a lot more that I'm still realizing about how my brain processes information, and not just words, also more about like conversations, communication, and all of that jazz as well. So there's more challenges beyond reading that I'm now realizing as I get older. But so that's where I touch on with neurodiversity, as well as in my family, autism runs through my family. So I've always been a massive advocate and ally to help be a voice when and where possible, using the tools that I have, which is very technology driven, using like VR and immersive technology to help with the conversation, but not be the person that is basically saying, oh, this is exactly how someone on the spectrum might feel. I never want to be that person, because I'm not autistic myself, but I always want to use my expertise to help with that conversation and growth. So I've been a really massive advocate for autism throughout my whole life, and all of my career life especially. So I spend a lot of my time working in ways that we can make sensory friendly environments, neurodiversity friendly spaces, and the main focus originally was in autism, again, just to create more awareness about the topic. And it's something that it's always sat closely with me when growing up, and creating like workspaces, but also social spaces, stepping outside the day-to-day of the 9 to 5. It's also trying to make spaces more accessible, and create a higher sense of acceptance has always been my way of thinking. And through that journey, I found out with my dyslexia, again, there's more about, it's not just about reading and processing information. There's a lot more to it. So that was my way in of why the topic of being neurodivergent sits very closely to me.
Thank you. And Lauren, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. I'm dyslexic, and I've had an interesting journey with it. Sort of a high-performing student who hit a bit of a brick wall in certain areas. And I was really lucky to be diagnosed really early, so in my early teens. And I won a scholarship to a school that was developing a program specifically for sort of high-performing dyslexic kids, which was incredible, because it meant the sort of the dominoes of feeling like you're not smart enough. That narrative didn't take root. Because instead, though, I was so lucky to have teachers who would say, well, you have to be curious about how you think, right? You might not think like other people, but maybe that's a superpower. And I was so lucky, and really lent into learning how it could be an incredible tool. So it's something that I've used. I've been working in VFX now for about 20 years. And I've noticed a real change from it being neurodiverse being something. Not only did we not have the term neurodiverse being used in a work lexicon at all, you would have the odd creative you work with that might make reference to being dyslexic, but it would often, when I heard it in the workplace, it was used as I'm sorry, but. What I love now is it's used as, oh, I'm dyslexic. I can use my approach to the way you have this problem. I can help you with that. Because I have a different approach, and I love when I find out that somebody's neurodivergent in my teams, because I will change my casting to account for it. And I think that's a massive sea change in the way we work now, that managers are given the opportunity and the skills to recognize that being neurodivergent can be an incredible skill. So I really like the fact that, you know, it's actively recognized as a skill, not as something to hold you back. I also think it puts a huge amount of responsibility on managers to make sure you are educated and you do know how to support your teams who are neurodivergent.
Definitely. So it sounds like you both were able to discover that quite early on in your lives. Do you think that that really helped you with your studies and then later on in your career to know that you had that neurodiverseness?
That's a really that's a good question. I think I found out a bit later on in my education. I was always put into more of like classes. I always forget how they rate them. But it was more the lower tier classes that needed that extra help. But I never got the diagnosis of dyslexia or dyspraxia until I was at college. I just was given extra time throughout exams. But when I went to college, it was very interesting because it was very exam driven during the secondary school, and then college was coursework. And then I began to thrive. I went from being the bottom of the class from all of my memory at secondary school to then being at the top, because I found out a way that actually I can work better in more of a coursework driven practice rather than exam and memory focus, which was a really massive turning point actually in my education, then filtering through into my career, because then I went on to do more of a coursework university class rather than exam driven, which I feel gave me a really step up from that feeling of, oh gosh, I'm always at the bottom. Why am I always at the bottom of the class? I don't understand. I'm trying my hardest. I'm not slacking off or anything like that. My parents could generally see like, yeah, you're generally trying. To them shifting to the bottom of the class and my dad being like, oh, you got into university. Oh, like that's we didn't think you'd go to university type of thing, because I was struggling so much throughout school. So I think the turning point of being able to do a degree that was coursework focus really helped me then get a step into the industry, because it allowed me to take more of a creative course, but then allowed me to then use all those skill set that I learned to then find a job which was again more related to how I would work. And in the creative industry, I mean, so many people that I've met are neurodivergent. And you know, same as what you were just saying earlier, Lauren, I love when I meet people who are neurodivergent, because I'm like, I understand from my experience how I can make this task a bit easier or a bit better for us to approach it in a different way. So I approach a lot of my work differently per task. It's so different depending on who I'm working with. And it teaches you a lot about, again, acceptance is key. You know, acceptance within comes first, so you can be more accepting throughout. And I think that just helps with, you know, patience of being able to navigate things differently. You know, I'm awful when I have a time cap. Someone says I need this in 2 minutes, it's the most urgent thing. I'm like, no, you need to approach me so differently, because how my brain will process that won't get the best answers. So it's been a really interesting journey to again navigate that into the industry and how I would approach it with my teams and my other projects as well.
I think there is a huge responsibility as well when you are neurodiverse, to make sure that you are taking responsibility for what you need as well. So I liked what you said, Katie. No, you need to approach me in a different way, right, to get what you need. I'll often, I provide feedback very readily and always have to anybody I work with, if the way they're presenting information to me is presenting it in a way that I can't digest it. So I say to my team all the time, I imagine you want to get me to yes. Okay. So if you want to get me to yes, you're going to need to present something in a visual way. If you send me a big spreadsheet and it's just full of figures, I'm going to get sucked into it and completely distracted for quite a long time. So if you want to get me to yes, you need to do an executive summary. It needs to have no more than 3 bullet points, and I will be able to get back to you rapidly, because one of the ways my brain works is I can see holistically the connection between multiple things very, very quickly. And if you give me that view, my pace is probably faster than most people I work with. And so I think when you start working with folks, it's really important to engage in that conversation. I think people are often quite surprised when they start working with me. One of my first questions is, tell me how you learn. And quite often people will just go, I don't understand. And I was like, it's really simple. Do you learn practically? Do you need to, read and digest? Do you want to have a debate about something? Because I need to understand how I get you to being really effective as quickly as possible. So I think that curiosity, be curious about yourself, be curious about other people, and really recognize that being highly effective as a neurodivergent person is that you have to meet people where they're at, not where you want them to be. And it goes both ways. I think it's also super exciting when somebody says, I don't really know much about dyslexia or being neurodiverse. How do I do a better job of supporting with or working with folks in my team that have this? I love that conversation.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think when people are curious, I always find it's about a lot of different topics, but if we're just focusing on neurodiversity, it's the curiosity of it's okay to explore the conversation and find the language. Because I find people are quite wary about what language can I use that isn't othering or patronizing. And I think I always approach it in a way of let's learn that in a collaborative way and together. Because I will correct you if I felt that was like a bit inappropriate or not the term we're really using these days, but you don't know what you don't know. And that's okay to slip up on language, slip up on a term, as long as you're open for someone to be like, actually, that's not quite right of how we speak about it. Let's try a different approach. So yeah, I back that. I back that, Lauren.
Yeah, and you both seem quite confident. Were you always quite confident in talking about it at work, or is this something that's grown as you've grown in your careers?
I mean, for my part, again, I'd credit my schooling and my parents with recognizing early that the way I think could be a really great thing. And even though I did well at school, I very quickly realized that I wanted to be practical in the way that I learn, because that's what works best for me. So I was lucky enough to get some work as a runner when I was 16. And it was a light bulb moment for me, because I thought, hang on, there are no books here. Like, don't get me wrong, I love to read, but I've learned that it's better for me, for instance, to listen to audiobooks, because it's a much more enjoyable experience for my dyslexic brain than, working through material like that. So the idea that there's this whole career path of being a runner, and you don't have to sit down and work your way through manuals, right? You need a couple of things. You need to be curious, you need to be kind, needs to be really, really just so willing to go above and beyond. And you can pretty much work your way through every different discipline if you want to. And that for me was this light bulb moment. And it reinforced for me that, well, dyslexia is my superpower here, because I would regularly say, figuring out what somebody needs, reciprocity is a really important part of it, right? So I'd remember how people want their tea or their coffee. I'd remember whose kids have, an after school party that they need to get away for. And I'd make sure that I could help people do those things. And very quickly, folks would say to me, hey, what are you interested in? You'd be like, oh, wow, I'd really like to understand what you do. And that has seen me from runner through to vice president. So I think that agility in the way you learn and recognizing that there are very different ways to learn builds confidence in you very quickly. But I also think we are lucky to be, it sounds like both to have grown up in environments where neurodiversity was something we were educated in at an early stage, even if we then learned more about ourselves as we progressed. It's not everybody is so lucky, and I work with lots of folks who are late diagnosed neurodivergent, And I recognize my privilege in this moment, talking about neurodiversity, coming from a position where that was very well supported. And I think that breeds confidence. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, some great points there. I think with me, I think it helped that my parents never put pressure on me. They didn't really expect me to leave my school being a doctor or engineer. They had a very much more of a just be happy, enjoy life type of thing, which I think really helps as a child. Like, I would be more upset getting a bad grade than my parents were. I'd have friends, if they got like a B, ooh, that's not great. If I got a B, my parents were like, whoa. And I think that really, really encouraged a lot of things. You know, I think having my parents who, again, approached it in a really more of a kind way, even though I didn't get the diagnosis of dyslexia, they just knew I was a bit more, I guess, slow at processing things of how the education system was built, and they knew I struggled with that. I always remember on the day we were getting our GCSEs, I had my tonsils removed the day before, and I remember my mum coming into the room. She was like, okay, I've looked at your grades. You did your best. You did your absolute best. And she read my grades out, and I was just like, oh, knife to my heart. Some of them, it was just, I didn't get the grades that I wanted and needed and put the effort in. So I think, again, having that really kind approach that my family took, which again is quite a lucky thing. And I think having autism that runs through my family, they knew about, learning disabilities and approach to bringing up children in that sense. And then I think, again, it's very lucky to have parents that are very much wanting you to just to be happy. And then when I moved on to learn more about the coursework side of things, again, I started to excel, and then I began learning about how can I actually create awareness about this topic. And that's when my career also in virtual reality started really taking off, is how can I use VR as an educational platform and an education ecosystem. So I spend a lot of my time doing that, as well as working in film, where I'm creating those experiences for people to learn about neurodiversity in a holistic way, and not putting people in a confined box like, oh, you're autistic, you have to adapt to society, and you have to keep in this box, and you have to learn how to adapt to society. Whereas that's not my approach. My approach is very, why don't we change how supermarkets are in general? Why don't we actually make it not sensory overwhelming for everybody? Why don't we look at it as making everything accessible? Why does it have to be, oh, we have to make it accessible? I lost my track of thoughts. We have to, adapt it for this one person. It's like, no, just adapt it for everyone. There's a saying that we use quite a lot, is like a wheelchair ramp. That's also great for new parents with prams. It's great for people that, can't do the steps. It's incredible for everybody. It's such a simple thing that we might think about, but accessibility is super key, and taking the approach of teaching people to be more accepting and how they can use their voice to make change in workplaces, schools, football stadiums, like everywhere and anywhere. That's my approach constantly. And
nice. And taking it back to the workplace, have you typically found that there is support readily available, or have you typically been the one to instigate things, or is it something that you've noticed has improved over the last few years in terms of support?
I am very lucky to work at Scanline and Netflix, where we actively work hard to create environments where we can bring different lived experiences and perspectives to a problem. And that means we solve them in really new ways. So we actively see it as an important part of how we manage our teams. We educate our managers and supervisors to make sure that they understand how to manage in the most inclusive way possible. So I feel very lucky to be in that environment.
That's good.
I think mine's slightly different. I think I think we've got quite a long way to go still in workplaces in general. I think, you know, the places that you just mentioned, Lauren, are pretty maybe notorious to be hot on those topics. But if we step out of that bubble, I think we've got quite a long way to go. I think with my own experience, you know, talking about these things was quite open. I think I feel that I have to direct some of those conversations, and make those conversations happen and start making that change. I don't think there's workflows and there for everybody to then offboard and onboard their employees. So yeah, I think a little bit differently. And again, I think that's why I focus a lot of my time is building a system, like an educational platform where people can go to and they're like, oh, this is how I can make things, you know, just better in the workplace, because I feel that we're not there. And that's not dampening on the studios and the people that I've worked with. You know, they're very much curious about the conversation. I've had people come to me of like, what should we do to make this space a bit more inclusive? Which is a great way to start. But you know, I think that needs to also be filtered from, you know, the HR side of things, from getting people who are neurodiverse and people who are neurodivergent, and creating a workflow that actually starts teaching people more about it.
It's a good point. Yeah. Quite often the expectation is that the other needs to be the educator. And I think we're always, again, interested and excited to be part of that. But it is really good to have an organization that meets you there, right? And says, hey, we've already done this work. We're not expecting you to come and do it for us, because, you know, a lot of the time we're not, you know, moving into roles where we're specialists in these areas. We are specialists in our own areas, and this is part of what makes us great.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I was just wondering, with hybrid and remote working, I know it's very individual still, but for your own experience, has that helped with your day-to-day working, having your own space and having more of a choice really of how to set up your environment, your work environment?
I've got to say, it's been a game changer for me. There are so many tools I use to help me be really effective. Controlling my own space as somebody who can be very visually distracted is huge. That would be something that I would struggle with a lot. You know, when I was coming up and you're in very kind of open offices where there was such a volume all the time, it could be very difficult to focus in. Then I was lucky enough, you know, to have my own office and I'd have more control. But I think it's incredible to be able to use dictation tools and transcripts throughout the day to help you manage how you analyze and digest all the information that's coming at you. It's incredibly important. I also learn a lot visually from, you know, I read people's faces while I'm talking to them, and that's a key component of how I take in information. So video calls are fantastic for that. Conversely, it's really challenging when some folks don't have their camera on, because, you know, there's sort of a level of additional focus is hard for me sometimes. But again, I'm very vocal with people about it, and I'll say, oh, you know, I might not be able to be as swift or as effective as we both want me to be if your camera's not on. Don't get me wrong, I still love being in the office, and I'm lucky enough that with my job I travel very regularly and get to spend time in offices. But to be able to use tools to help me be effective now that I have more control of my working space is it's been pretty transformational. And I know a lot of folks with ADHD in particular have found their energy management is entirely different, because they are able to get up and move about while they're on calls. They can, you know, really curate an environment that helps them do their best work, which is fantastic.
Amazing.
I fully agree. I remember when we started doing remote working, I all of a sudden was better than I have ever been at performing in my role. I remember changing jobs, I think maybe halfway through COVID, and I just like found my rhythm. And it really is about the controlled environment. It really is. I'm quite easily distracted. I go into the office. I like to chat to everybody. I'm there like, I go to the personal questions, you know, I want to know really, how are you doing? And I think also with, you know, being in the office, I think it's great for that kind of building the social side and really getting to know people, and you can gauge people of like if they want to talk about anything or if they don't. But I find being at home, I'm able to get always a lot more done because I'm able to really have that control of my environment, earphones in or music, like lo-fi beats, study beats over there. And it really has been such a game changer. And I think I could speak for a couple of people I've spoken who are also neurodivergent, is having that environment where you can cater it to what you need and have the breaks when you need. You don't feel like a pressure to be like, I need to do meetings until midday and then have an hour break and then crack on, and I need to look like I'm working. It's like a necessary amount of pressure. Whereas, you know, after a meeting, you kind of want to be able to come down a little bit and get an idea of what just happened in that meeting and look at your notes. And I think that was something I really valued when it came to remote working. I was able to actually start thriving better, and I didn't realize any like that why and the what and the why until again recently, of realizing, you know, I am a bit sensitive to like noises in the office and like different tones changing. Like I know I have definitely some form of sensory processing that is different to, let's say, the neurotypical people. And you know, that's okay. There's only so much noise cancelling headphones can do. So I think the hybrid manner is really good because it allows people to choose when, you know, maybe when they go into the office and when they stay at home. And I think that's a really massive thing that we should never get away. I think it's so cool when I see jobs where it's like on site. I'm like, you're missing a whole audience. I will never work for a company that's just fully on site, because that I would not be able to thrive. I would not be able to be my best self, and they would not get the best results from me. I need my own time to process how I process, and I've been performing so much better since we've been able to do a hybrid setting and remote setting that I never thought I really needed until it happened. So I really do think it's great that some, you know, in workplaces we should create the spaces to cater for these needs. But for you to open that space, you need to be open to say you can work from home, because there's like emotional burnout. I find if I'm in the office Monday to Friday, it burns me out because you kind of, sometimes you have this mask on. I think everyone has that. You know, you've got your work voice and then your friend's voice of how you would talk to the girls and stuff. And then, you know, they're completely different approaches of conversations, right? Whereas I find working in a remote setting allows me to like balance my battery level of how I use it, when I use it, how long I use it for. And yeah, I find the remote hybrid is definitely a game changer, especially for neurodivergent individuals.
Yeah, nice. And just going back to tools and resources, I am going to follow up in a blog after this talk with some links to some handy resources. But is there anything that you found particularly useful, either now or during your career, that you recommend for people to look up or use? You mentioned
I'm a massive fan of so I love going to SIGGRAPH. I absolutely love it, right? I love digesting these fantastic new ideas, but I can't read a white paper for love nor money. So I love tools that help me digest really complex ideas in a really effective way. So for me, the best way to do that is to move around while I'm taking in that information. So, you know, text to speech tools are fantastic. Audible, podcasts. You know, we're so lucky that a lot of learning can happen in a way that really suits neurodiverse brains. which is amazing. So now this idea that you know, you can pretty much go on to any, however you get your podcast or Substack, and want to know more about an idea that could feel very dense and very difficult to get into. But for me, you know, doing that via Audible or doing it via any audiobook or a podcast is just such a much more accessible way to digest information. I certainly know that I have, you know, a lot of colleagues who have kids who are neurodiverse and friends who are neurodiverse, and it's going to seem like a weird recommendation, but the fidget desks and fidget stools you can get now are transformational.
Fidget desk?
Yeah, so you can get a little bar that attaches to the bottom of your desk that moves backwards and forwards. And for kids with ADHD, for instance, it's incredible. Their difference of focus during lessons when they can move backwards and forwards jumps up. And you can get them also, you know, for your home office, and they have different, you know, there's like a main stool and then there's a swiveling attachment to it that you can put your, you know, your knees on, and you can move around and be you know, be much more active in how you engage with it. And, you know, an extension of that is just a standing desk, right? These different ways. I think there are, you know, the technology tools, and then there are just very practical abilities to control your own space. And what might previously have been seen as sort of fidgeting and something that might put off neurotypical folks that you work with in your own space, you're entirely in control of it. And I think that makes us very lucky.
I just Googled that. They look great.
Yeah.
I've actually never heard of a fidget desk. I'm actually going to Google that straight away.
That
sounds incredible.
Absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you, a friend of mine whose child, I think he's about 7, recently the school fitted the fidget desks, and he came back and said to his dad, "Daddy, I thought I was just stupid." And like that level of transformation, it gets you in the feels, right? But it doesn't just have to be for kids. Like I said, there are lots of folks who are being diagnosed neurodiverse in their 40s and their 50s. And there are all these tools available. And I think, as you know, as colleagues and managers as well, we can help to share knowledge of what can help. So those are tools that for me have been pretty transformational.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
I've learned something there as well. I'm like, well, fidget desk. Yeah, I think going off the standing desk, I think they are great. So I am a bit of a fidgeter, but I'm always trying to find new things, funny enough. And some things distract me too much. So then I think as basic as a stress ball would be, but like a foam one, I want to get one of those. I think that could just generally help. Otherwise, I use my earphone case in meetings, you know, that magnet feeling, that's a go-to. But other tools in general that I would use, definitely the voice. I voice note a lot. Some, like, my middle brother hates it. He's like, I know you voice note, let's just jump on a call, because I love a voice note. And also, yeah, I think sometimes I get my text, especially when I'm reading more of a heavy read of a research paper, I will get it to read out to me, because there's no way. Otherwise, I don't know if you've ever felt this, Lauren, but sometimes when I'm reading on my computer, I would literally have to do this with my hands if I'm really, if I'm on the higher end of being a bit overwhelmed or feel pressure that comes from within, that sense that I bring on myself, and I start doing this because I just can't. It's not like the letters or anything are jumbling around. I just can't bring myself into that focal point. So I started using a lot more of audio speaking out to me, which is great. And, you know, podcasts are incredible. And just I also try and do a little bit of reading. I'm not the biggest reader, just because it's very time consuming for me. Some people can bash out a book in like 2 days. I'm like, I wish I could do that. So I'm very much of a visual learner. And then I think in terms of learning more about neurodiversity in general, I think one of the things that I think I've drawn into a little bit more is about sensory processing. And I think I draw into that a little bit because that comes into how people physically feel and mentally feel in that moment. So I explore that a lot more. And there's, you know, I sound like such an old person. There's lots on the internet about that. You know, you just get the browser, click away. But I think a lot of my readings at the moment is coming from a bit more of a heavier research background, just because of what I do with work as well. It's very much, you know, if I'm there trying to create immersive experiences, I need to have a bit more of a research backed study, but they can be very hard. So that's when the audio recognition comes into play. Also, I don't want to be that person, but my good friend ChatGPT has been a bit of a game changer at times. It really does actually, how I prompt it really helps me, I think, summarize things a bit easier. And that also comes with papers that I'm reading. Obviously, there has to be like that fact checking involved in everything, but it's been such a great tool for me in terms of being able to just understand what I'm trying to say, because I kind of stumble over my words in my mind and I can't seem to sometimes form the correct sentence, and ChatGPT helps me form that correct sentence. And that has actually been such a weight off my shoulders, because usually, you know, I still like text my friends at times, like, which there should I use? You know, and I asked ChatGPT the other day that you could sit me down for an hour and teach me about there, and there. It's just something that I've just never been able to like fully grab. And you know, ChatGPT helps me with things like that. Is like using the correct language, what type of literature that you should be using, and things like that. So yeah. I mean, yeah. Is it a talk if you don't mention AI?
Thank you. And I'm sorry to lay this question on you. I may or may not be asking for myself, partly. But Lauren, you mentioned a lot of people are being diagnosed later in life, and I read that women, especially, are being diagnosed with ADHD around age 38. Have you had many people, friends, family come to you and say, how do I know if I'm neurodiverse? I have these traits, and who do I go to first? What do I do?
Why these talks that you're organizing are so important. So I want to say thank you for that as well, Hayley, because if you don't know somebody who's neurodiverse, it's really hard to know who to ask, right? So I'm a firm believer, and this goes for representation across the whole industry. If you can't see yourself reflected in the leaders around you, it's hard for you to project yourself into that position, right? So the more we talk about being neurodiverse at every single level, it's so important. What I've seen a lot is, yes, the more I talk about it, the more folks will come to me and say, is this a neurodivergent behavior? And I'll quite often say, listen, you know, I pride myself on being a little bit neurospicy. And I think there are lots of behaviors, particularly around ADHD, for instance, which are very environmental. So you can, you know, experience struggle focusing because of the deluge of environmental impacts that you have just stepping outside of your door, right? It's a very normal thing. But I think that there is most definitely now, through an increase in the conversation around neurodiversity, much more awareness that women in particular can quite often go well into their later life before anybody will even raise to them that this might be an issue. And I think, you know, Instagram and TikTok are amazing for this, because there have been this groundswell of people talking about their personal experiences that now have raised awareness around ADHD in particular in a way that just didn't exist before. And I think women, we so often have an imposter syndrome anyway. So we are less likely to bring forward and to talk about these behaviors. We sort of, you know, we think it should be hard anyway, so it's fine, you know, you crack on because that's what you do. But in reality, it means we quite often mask a lot and have very good coping mechanisms to deal with experiences. And remember, I mean, I say remember, but this is something we should talk about. ADHD in particular presents a huge breadth of different experiences for folks. There are different types of ADHD. There is a sort of an assumption, or maybe a generalization, that ADHD shows up as young boys who can't sit still, right? But I in my family have experienced as somebody with ADHD who learned to knit at a very young age. And that masked the fact that they had ADHD because they had found a stimulating way to be busy whenever they had to sit down. Right? We're ingenious the way we mask and find different ways of coping. But it's really, really good that now there's a wider understanding that absolutely women can have ADHD, just like you can go into much later life before you find out. But the reassuring part is there are tools available to you, there's support available to you. And I'd love to see more employers really recognizing their responsibility to provide spaces for people to explore that. Sometimes that means you're in a job you love, but that might not be just the right job for you when you realize these things. And I've supported quite a few folks actually moving from different disciplines once they've been diagnosed with ADHD, and realizing that actually there's a different discipline that would really suit their style of learning, and they've really bloomed, which I think as a manager makes me feel very lucky to be able to help them do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I think what you just mentioned, I could have clapped my hands, because I was like, yes, representation. It sounds like a word we say over and over, but it's so important. Representation in leadership, that goes with so much. That's not even just about neurodiversity. It's about all the topics that fit under EDI. It's representation is absolutely everything. And I just wanted to emphasize that, Lauren. So I think how you worded that, I was just like, I just wanted to click my fingers. I was like, yes, that is music to my ears. That's what I want to hear. That is so cool, and such a massive part to change. Having someone in a leadership role who is neurodivergent, it really is, that's where change begins, and that's so important. But I think in terms of, actually, I might have forgot the original question, Hayley. I was so absorbed into what you were saying, Lauren. I was like, yes, keep going. That's amazing.
It was if anyone had approached you, friends, family, colleagues, just thinking, I think I might be neurodiverse. Like, how do I find out? Have you become the fountain of knowledge for your friends and family?
Yeah, I mean, I've had people pop up to me about their kids being like, I think my son or my daughter might have ADHD, autism. It's usually mainly about autism, because that's what I speak quite a lot about. And that's been an interesting one, where I will send them research links, and especially about sensory processing. Your young child it might be on the spectrum. Let's focus on their senses, like just being in the house. That TV and radio being on the same time, I'd be crying. That is overwhelming. Let's try and those levels that are heightened, let's lower them. So I've had a lot of conversations mainly about friends' children that are getting diagnoses. I'm finding a lot more people, especially women, are getting a diagnosis much later in life. It's so sad, but it's so true. And it's down to masking. I found in the past year, I feel like I've been becoming a bit more neurospicy. I love the term neurospicy. I get that tattooed on me. Neurospicy is such a great word to use. Makes the conversation a bit more fun. But I'm finding, I think, working remotely and being able to have an environment that I really enjoy has actually helped me take the mask off a little bit. And that's been a really interesting discovery / also coming to terms with a few things about my processing and how I approach things, and how how I go about things. And that's been such a big learning curve in my journey. Is I said to, I think, one of my friends the other day, I just feel like I'm becoming more neurospicy as I get older. And then they said, maybe it's because you don't mask as much.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Me too.
I was at an event the other night, and it was super overwhelming, really, really noisy, so many people to see, and this real moment of a celebration at VES. And I was so grateful to be there. And I do this thing that, if you know me and know that I'm neurospicy, I do, which is around about every hour, I have to go and stand outside. And the reason I have to go and stand outside is because the sensory overload for me becomes so much that I can't really hear people anymore. Anyway, I went outside, and I thought it was hilarious because instead of seeing a group of, folks outside smoking or drinking, there's this group, and I turned to somebody and I went, neurospicy? And they went, neurospicy. And we were standing there in the quiet, and then we all turned around and went back in. And that for me was this moment where I just wanted to, it was really emotional. I felt like that is fantastic, because we're this creative, incredibly kind of committed, excited group of people. We want to do incredible work. But that was this moment of not masking, but also of real kind of like celebration and support, which for me just made me feel very, very seen, but also very grateful.
I love that. I'm actually going to tell people that story. That is such a, how times have changed though. And that's a really positive thing of how we're seeing society adapt and change, and especially maybe more so in the creative industry. I can't really speak for those in the banking world, but that's such a huge milestone in the neurospicy community. Can't stop saying neurospicy, the neurodivergent community. That's such a big moment there. I think that's a massive takeaway from this conversation. I think people being okay to talk about it, feeling okay to talk about it. One of my family members that was diagnosed with autism, there's so much stigma when he got the diagnosis in the 80s, so much stigma, and I can still feel that weight on his shoulders. And that's why I'm such an advocate for speaking about these things, because he will say, I don't want people knowing that I'm autistic. I'm like, that's okay, that is so your choice, but let's talk about it more. But it's so ingrained from being in the 80s and growing up with those really tough conversations, and not so much empathy and not so much acceptance. So I think that's such a great and amazing milestone to see, just in that moment. And I hope to see more of that when I step outside from an event or somewhere. I want to step out and be like, no spicy corner, let's go over there. And also encourage people to step out. I go to so many. I've been to like a dinner the other day, and I could sense a few people around the table will all experience sensory overload. They weren't, diagnosed with any sorts of neurodiversity, but I could sense that buildup, and a lot of them, some of them were women, and it's just like, I'm not saying they are neurodivergent, but just sensory overload and processing. I think having a space just to step out and take a break, take that moment, take a breather, so important. I love that.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I'd love to keep talking, but I'm really sorry I have to go.
We're out of time. But I just wanted to say that I love this conversation, and thank you so much for spending the time today. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Let's not just do it for International Women's Day. Let's keep it going, and let's talk again throughout the year. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Hayley, and thank you, Katie. Have a good day.
Thank you both. You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.